My boyfriend texted, "Having lunch with Jessica, just call an Uber." I was still bleeding on the highway after a car crash. He was still enjoying his meal with his beloved best friend until a cop arrived at his table to deliver my emergency message. "I need to tell you something that happened 6 months ago, and I swear this is exactly how it went down. You're going to think I'm making this up, but I have the hospital records, the police report, and the text screenshots to prove every word." My boyfriend of 3 years, let's call him Marcus because that's his name and honestly, he deserves whatever comes to him, sent me that text at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone in disbelief when the semi-truck ran the red light. But let me back up. You need the full picture to understand just how twisted this gets. Marcus and I had been planning this day for weeks. My sister's wedding dress fitting was at 3 p.m., and she'd specifically asked me to drive her because she was too nervous to handle traffic. It was a big deal, the kind of sister moment you don't reschedule. Marcus knew this. We'd talked about it over breakfast, over coffee, over everything. He was supposed to pick me up at 2:30 so I could grab Sarah and make it to the boutique on time. At 2:45, I'm standing outside my apartment building with my purse and the little gift bag I'd wrapped for Sarah, this vintage pearl bracelet that belonged to our grandmother. My phone buzzes. Running late. Having lunch with Jessica, just call an Uber. Just like that. No apology, no explanation beyond the obvious lie. Jessica. His best friend from college who somehow needed emergency lunches every time I had something important going on. The same Jessica who'd been texting him at weird hours, who he'd gotten defensive about when I asked innocent questions, who apparently had more access to my boyfriend's schedule than I did. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt this cold, hollow sensation in my chest, like something breaking that I hadn't realized was already cracked. But here's what really gets me, I still called the Uber. Because my sister needed me, and that mattered more than Marcus being a selfish piece of garbage. I was raised to keep my commitments, even when the people I loved couldn't manage the same basic courtesy. The driver was the sweet older man named Roberto who kept apologizing for his English even though it was better than half the people I went to college with. He had pictures of his grandkids hanging from his rearview mirror, and he was telling me about his daughter's quinceañera while I sat in the backseat, still staring at that text message. "You okay, mija?" he asked, glancing at me in the mirror. "You look upset." I almost laughed. Upset didn't begin to cover it. 3 years of my life, and I was apparently worth less than whatever Jessica was serving for lunch. "Just boyfriend problems," I said, which was the understatement of the century. "Ah." Roberto nodded knowingly. "My wife, she always tells our daughters, watch how a man treats you when you need him most. That's when you see who he really is." I was about to respond when the world exploded. The sound came first, this horrible screeching of metal and glass that seemed to go on forever. Then the spinning, the weightless feeling, the way the sky and ground kept switching places through the windshield. Roberto was shouting something in Spanish, and I remember thinking, stupidly, that I hope his grandkids would be okay without him. We ended up in a ditch on the side of Highway 6, and I don't remember much about the immediate aftermath except the taste of blood in my mouth and the way my left arm felt wrong. Roberto was unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel, and there was this steady dripping sound that might have been radiator fluid or something worse. My phone was somewhere on the floor, screen cracked but still working. The first thing I did, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, was call Marcus. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. By the third call, I was crying and bleeding and starting to realize that maybe Roberto wasn't just unconscious. The other driver, the one who'd run the red light, was already out of his truck, pacing around and yelling into his phone about how his delivery schedule was ruined. That's when I started getting scared. Really scared. I managed to dial 911 with shaking hands, gave them our location, tried to explain what had happened. The dispatcher kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. Was Roberto breathing? Could I see any obvious injuries? Did I know if anyone else was hurt? I kept looking at Roberto's still form and thinking about those pictures of his grandkids. The ambulance arrived first, then the fire trucks, then what seemed like half the police force in our county. They got Roberto out. He was alive, thank goodness, just unconscious with a concussion and some broken ribs. They loaded me onto a gurney next, and I kept asking if I could call someone, if anyone could reach my sister, if they understood that there was supposed to be a wedding dress fitting. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital," the paramedic said. She was this no-nonsense woman with kind eyes who kept checking my pupils with a flashlight. "You've got a concussion, possible internal bleeding, and that arm needs x-rays. Someone can make calls for you once we get you stabilized." I gave them Marcus's number first, then my sister's, then my parents'. I explained about the dress fitting, about how Sarah would be waiting, about how Marcus was supposed to pick me up in the first place, but he was having lunch with Jessica instead. The paramedic, her name tag said Chen, raised an eyebrow. He left you to take an Uber to something important? It's complicated, I mumbled, though honestly, it was starting to seem pretty simple. At the hospital, they wheeled me through a maze of corridors that all smelled like disinfectant and floor wax. The pain was starting to hit by then, my arm was definitely broken, my ribs felt like someone had used them for batting practice, and I had this splitting headache that made the fluorescent lights feel like ice picks in my brain. They got me into a bed in the emergency room, started in 4, took what felt like 47 x-rays. Through it all, I kept asking if anyone had reached Marcus, if someone could please call my sister and explain what happened. We've left several messages, one of the nurses told me. I'm sure someone will call back soon. But nobody did. Sarah finally showed up around 5 p.m., still in her work clothes, looking panicked and furious in equal measure. She'd gotten worried when I didn't show up for the fitting, had called my apartment, had eventually called the police when she couldn't reach me anywhere. "Where the heck is Marcus?" were the first words out of her mouth. That's when I started crying again. Not from the pain, though my arm really did hurt, but from the humiliation. My sister had to find out about my accident from the police because my boyfriend of 3 years couldn't be bothered to answer his phone. Sarah sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to my bed and held my good hand while I told her everything. The text message, the Uber, the crash, the unanswered calls. She listened with this expression of growing disbelief and rage. "He's still not answering?" she asked. I showed her my phone. 7 missed calls to Marcus, all going straight to voicemail. Sarah grabbed the phone and tried calling him herself. Same result. "What about Jessica?" she asked, and there was something sharp in her voice that I didn't recognize. I didn't have Jessica's number. In 3 years of dating Marcus, I'd never actually met his best friend from college face to face. Weird, right? She was always traveling for work, or sick, or busy, or something. But she could apparently make time for emergency lunches. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at my phone screen. Then she said something that changed everything. "Emma, I need to tell you something. I probably should have said this months ago, but I hoped I was wrong." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I know Jessica. I know who she is. Remember my friend Kate from high school? The one who works at that marketing firm downtown?" I nodded, not sure where this was going. "Jessica works there too. Kate's mentioned her before. And Emma. Jessica isn't single. She's been married for 2 years. To a guy named David who works in finance." The room started spinning again, and this time it wasn't from the concussion. "That's not." I started, but the words died in my throat. Because suddenly, so many things were making sense. The secret lunches, the defensive behavior, the way Marcus always seemed to know exactly what Jessica was up to but could never arrange for me to meet her. "Kate showed me Jessica's Instagram once," Sarah continued gently. "She posts pictures of herself and David all the time. Their anniversary dinners, their trips to wine country, their new apartment. She's not hiding the fact that she's married, Emma. She's just hiding it from you." I felt like I was drowning. "So Marcus is either Jessica's side piece, or you are." We sat in silence while that sank in. The sounds of the emergency room continued around us, monitors beeping, nurses calling out updates, someone's family arguing in hushed voices by the vending machines. But all I could think about was Marcus, somewhere across town, having a lovely afternoon with a married woman while I bled in a hospital bed. My phone buzzed. For a split second, I thought it might be Marcus finally calling back. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "Is this Emma Rodriguez? This is Officer Patterson with the State Police. We have your boyfriend Marcus here at Bella Vista Restaurant. He says he didn't know about your accident. Can you confirm you've been trying to reach him?" I showed the message to Sarah, who read it and then looked at me with this expression of grim satisfaction. "They went to find him." "The police went to the restaurant?" "Standard procedure for serious accidents," Sarah explained. "When they can't reach your emergency contact, they'll track them down if necessary. Especially when it's a car accident with injuries." I could picture it perfectly, Marcus sitting across from Jessica at some cozy little bistro, probably holding hands over the bread basket, completely absorbed in whatever story she was telling or lie they were constructing together. The sudden appearance of a uniformed officer, the awkward explanations, Jessica's surprise at learning Marcus had a girlfriend who'd been trying to reach him for hours. My phone rang. "Marcus, finally." "Emma. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I had my phone on silent and I didn't see. Where are you?" I asked. A pause. I was having lunch, and then this police officer came and said you'd been in an accident. Are you okay? What happened? His voice had that careful quality people use when they know they're in trouble but aren't sure how much trouble yet. I'm in the hospital, Marcus. I've been trying to call you for 3 hours. I know, I'm sorry, my phone was Jessica's phone on silent too? Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean? I mean, did the police officer interrupt both of you, or just you? Emma, I don't understand why you're being, because I know she's married, Marcus. I know you've been lying to me about who she is and what you're doing with her. And I know that while I was bleeding on the side of the highway, you were holding hands with someone else's wife and ignoring my calls. The silence stretched out so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he said, I'm coming to the hospital. We'll talk about this when I get there. Don't bother. Emma, please, I hung up. Sarah was watching me with a mixture of pride and concern. How do you feel? Honestly? Besides the broken arm and the concussion? I feel like an idiot. For what? For not seeing it sooner. For making excuses for him. For calling an Uber to something important because he was too busy cheating on me to keep a promise. A nurse appeared at the foot of my bed with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression. Miss Rodriguez? The doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation because of the head injury. Is there someone we can call to bring you some things from home? I'll take care of it, Sarah said immediately. And I'll stay with her tonight. After the nurse left, Sarah leaned forward in her chair. So what happens now? I thought about it. Marcus would show up eventually, probably with some elaborate explanation about how I was misunderstanding everything, how Jessica was just a friend going through a rough patch in her marriage, how he'd never meant for any of this to happen. He'd be sorry and charming and just convincing enough to make me doubt what I knew to be true. 3 days ago, I probably would have believed him. I would have accepted his apologies and his promises to do better. I would have ignored the voice in my head that had been trying to warn me for months. But something had changed in that moment when I realized he wasn't going to answer his phone. When I understood, lying in a wrecked car with a concussion and a broken arm, that the person I'd been planning a future with couldn't be bothered to be there when I needed him most. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to listen to Roberto's wife. Roberto? The Uber driver. His wife told her daughters to watch how a man treats you when you need him most. Because that's when you see who he really is. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. Roberto's wife sounds like a smart woman. She is. And she raised daughters who probably don't waste 3 years of their lives on guys who prioritize other women over emergencies. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, on my way. Please don't make any decisions while you're upset and hurt. We can work through this. I showed it to Sarah, who snorted. He's worried you're going to make decisions while you're thinking clearly. Exactly. I started typing a response, deleted it, started again. Finally, I settled on something simple. Don't come to the hospital. We're done. I'll have Sarah pack up your things and leave them with your doorman. Don't contact me again. His response came back immediately, Emma, please. Let me explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I typed back. And that's the problem. This time, he didn't respond. The overnight stay in the hospital wasn't fun. They woke me up every few hours to check my pupils and asked me basic questions to make sure my brain was working properly. But Sarah stayed the whole time, sleeping in that terrible plastic chair, making sure I wasn't alone. Around 3 a.m., when the hospital was finally quiet except for the distant sounds of machines and night shift conversations, Sarah asked me the question I'd been dreading. Do you think he was sleeping with her? I'd been staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the timeline of Marcus's behavior over the past few months. The late nights at work, the defensive reactions when I asked about his day, the way he'd started being vague about his plans. Yeah, I said finally. I think he was. I'm sorry. You know what the worst part is? It's not even that he was cheating. It's that he left me bleeding on the highway because his affair was more important than keeping a promise to me. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you know what I keep thinking about? That text message. Having lunch with Jessica, just call an Uber. Like you were some casual acquaintance he was blowing off, not his girlfriend of 3 years. She was right. There was something so dismissive about that message, so careless. Like my emergency didn't rate a proper excuse or even a believable lie. He couldn't even be bothered to come up with a good story, I said. Just running late, like I was supposed to accept that and move on. Because he thought you would. The truth of that hit me like a punch to the chest. He thought I would accept it because I always had before. All those times he changed plans at the last minute, all those excuses that didn't quite add up, all those moments when I'd chosen to trust him instead of trusting my instincts. I trained him to treat me this way, I said. No, you didn't. He chose to treat you this way. You just chose to love someone who didn't deserve it. I started crying again, but this time it felt different. Not the humiliated tears from earlier, but something deeper. Grief, maybe, for the 3 years I'd wasted, for the future I'd imagined that was never going to happen. I really thought he was going to marry me, I whispered. Maybe he thought so too. Before Jessica. Or maybe he was always looking for an upgrade and I was just convenient until something better came along. Sarah reached over and squeezed my good hand. His loss, Em. Seriously. You're going to find someone who answers his phone when you call. The next morning brought a parade of doctors and nurses, discharge paperwork, and a prescription for pain medication that came with stern warnings about not driving or operating heavy machinery. My arm was in a cast that would stay on for at least 6 weeks, and I had a follow-up appointment with a neurologist to make sure the concussion was healing properly. Sarah drove me home in her car, and we spent the ride in comfortable silence. It wasn't until we pulled into my parking lot that I realized I was going to have to face the physical reminders of Marcus everywhere, his toothbrush by the bathroom sink, his favorite coffee mug in the dish drainer, the spare key to his apartment hanging on my keyring. Do you want me to come up and help you pack his stuff? Sarah asked. Not yet. I think I need a day to process everything first. But as we walked up to my apartment building, I saw Marcus sitting on the front steps. He looked terrible. Wrinkled clothes, messy hair, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the instinct to comfort him even when he was the one who'd hurt me. Then I remembered the sound of my phone going straight to voicemail while I sat bleeding in a wrecked car. Emma, please, he said, standing up as we approached. Can we just talk? There's nothing to talk about. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I interrupted. When I needed you, you chose Jessica. When I was hurt and scared, you chose to ignore my calls. When a police officer had to track you down at a restaurant, you chose to lie about why your phone was off. Sarah positioned herself slightly between Marcus and me, which I appreciated. It's not that simple, Marcus said. Jessica was going through something, and I was just trying to be a good friend. Is Jessica getting divorced? I asked. He stopped mid-sentence. What? If she was going through something that required emergency lunch meetings and secrecy, I assume she's leaving her husband David. When's she filing papers? Marcus's face went white. How did you know that she's married? That you've been lying to me about who she is for months? That while I was in the hospital, you were on a date with someone else's wife? It's not what? Not an affair? Not a betrayal? Not the reason you couldn't be bothered to answer your phone when your girlfriend was bleeding on the side of the highway? People walking past were starting to stare, but I didn't care. 3 years of swallowing my doubts and giving him the benefit of every doubt had led to this moment, and I was done being diplomatic. I love you, Marcus said desperately. We can work through this. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Marcus. This was a pattern. This was you deciding that I was convenient until something better came along. This was you treating me like I didn't matter. That's not true. Then why didn't you answer your phone? He opened his mouth and then closed it again. Because there wasn't a good answer to that question, and we both knew it. I thought Jessica needed me, he said finally. And I actually needed you. I was hurt and scared and calling for help, and you chose her anyway. Sarah stepped forward. Marcus, I think you should leave. This is between Emma and me. No, it's not, I said. It stopped being between us when you decided to put another woman first. When you made me take an Uber to something important so you could have lunch with your married girlfriend. When you ignored 7 phone calls from the hospital. I didn't know they were from the hospital, because you didn't answer. That's the point. We stood there in silence for a moment, looking at each other across what felt like an enormous distance. This person I'd shared a bed with, made breakfast for, planned vacations with, was suddenly a stranger. Had he always been this selfish, or had I just refused to see it? I'll pack up your things, I said finally. Sarah will drop them off this weekend. Emma, we're done, Marcus. I'm not going to be the woman who competes with someone else's wife for her boyfriend's attention. I'm not going to be the backup plan you call when your first choice isn't available. Please don't do this while you're upset. I'm not upset, I said, and realized it was true. I'm done. There's a difference. I walked past him toward the building entrance, Sarah right behind me. He called my name once more, but I didn't turn around. I heard his footsteps on the concrete, then the sound of a car door slamming and an engine starting up. Inside my apartment, everything looked the same as when I'd left the day before, but it felt different. Smaller, maybe, or cleaner. Like something toxic had been removed from the air. How are you doing? Sarah asked, settling onto my couch. I thought about it honestly. My arm hurt, my head was still tender where I'd hit the window, and I could feel the emotional crash starting to hit as the adrenaline wore off. But underneath all of that was something I hadn't expected: relief. I'm okay, I said. I think I'm actually okay. And you know what? I was. The next few weeks were strange. I had to learn to do everything one-handed while my arm healed: showering, cooking, typing, getting dressed. Sarah came over most evenings to help with the things I couldn't manage on my own, and my parents drove up from Phoenix to spend a weekend fussing over me and making sure I was eating properly. Roberto, the Uber driver, sent me a card from his hospital bed. He was going to be fine, the concussion had been mild, and his ribs were healing well. His daughter had written me a note too, in careful English, thanking me for calling 911 and staying with her father until help arrived. Papa says you were very brave, she wrote. He wants to know if you are feeling better and if the bad boyfriend is gone. I laughed out loud when I read that. Even semi-conscious and injured, Roberto had picked up on the Marcus situation. The police report came in the mail 3 weeks after the accident. The other driver, the one with the delivery truck, had been charged with running a red light and reckless driving. His insurance company was covering all my medical expenses and Roberto's too, plus compensation for the trauma and lost wages. But the part that stuck with me was Officer Patterson's notes from that day. There was a detailed account of how they tracked down Marcus at Bella Vista Restaurant, how long it had taken to get him to understand the seriousness of the situation, and how he'd initially seemed more concerned about being interrupted than about my condition. Subject appeared reluctant to end lunch meeting, the report noted. Required repeated explanations before agreeing to contact victim. Reluctant to end lunch meeting. That was my boyfriend of 3 years. A man who had to be convinced by a police officer to call his injured girlfriend. I kept the report in my desk drawer, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I never wanted to forget how clearly I could see the truth when I stopped making excuses for someone else's behavior. Marcus tried calling a few more times over the next month. I didn't answer, but I listened to his voicemails. They followed a predictable pattern: first anger, you're being completely unreasonable, then bargaining, we can go to couples therapy, then desperation, I made a mistake, but I love you. What he never said was that he'd ended things with Jessica. What he never acknowledged was that his mistake was actually a series of deliberate choices that had prioritized someone else over me for months. Sarah delivered his things as promised, and reported back that he'd looked terrible and kept asking if I might change my mind eventually. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him that women who have to compete for their boyfriend's attention usually find better boyfriends. 2 months after the accident, I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. I recognized her immediately from the Instagram photos Sarah had shown me: tall, blonde, with a kind of effortless style that probably cost a fortune to maintain. She was in the produce section, carefully selecting avocados, wearing a wedding ring that caught the fluorescent lights. For a moment, I considered just walking away. I didn't owe her a confrontation, and I certainly didn't need the drama. But something in me wanted to see her face when she realized who I was. Jessica? I said, approaching her cart. She looked up with that polite smile people give to strangers in public places. Yes? I'm Emma Rodriguez. Marcus's girlfriend. Well, ex-girlfriend now. The smile disappeared immediately, replaced by a look of recognition and something that might have been shame. Oh, she said quietly. Emma. I just wanted you to know that I hope whatever you were going through during those lunch meetings worked out okay. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out how much I knew and how angry I was likely to get. It's not what you think, she started. It's exactly what I think, I said, echoing what I told Marcus. And honestly? I don't care anymore. I just wanted to see for myself what 3 years of my life was worth. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Jessica? Next time you're having an affair, maybe suggest that your boyfriend not ignore emergency calls from the hospital. It's a bad look. I left her standing there in the produce section, still holding an avocado, looking like she'd seen a ghost. That night, Sarah called to check in on me like she had every day since the accident. So I heard through the grapevine that you had an encounter at Whole Foods today, she said. News travels fast. Kate saw the whole thing. She said Jessica looked like she was going to cry. Good. She should cry. Her husband should know what she's been doing, and Marcus should have to explain to someone why he thought lunch dates were more important than emergency phone calls. Any regrets? I thought about it. No. I'm glad I said something. I'm glad I looked her in the eye and let her know that her choices had consequences for real people. And how are you doing otherwise? Honestly? Better than I expected. My arm is healing, my headaches are gone, and I'm sleeping better than I have in months. No heartbreak? Some, I admitted. But not for Marcus. For the 3 years I wasted, for the version of him I thought I was in love with. I'm mourning something that never actually existed. 6 months later, I'm writing this whole story down because I want to remember every detail. Not because I'm bitter, though I was, for a while, but because I want to remember what it felt like to finally stop making excuses for someone who didn't deserve them. I found out through mutual friends that Marcus and Jessica lasted about 6 weeks after our breakup. Apparently, once the excitement of sneaking around was gone, they didn't have much in common. Jessica stayed with her husband David, and Marcus is dating someone new now, a girl from his gym who's probably getting the same treatment I got for 3 years. Roberto and I stay in touch. He's back to driving full-time, and his English has gotten even better. His wife was right about watching how a man treats you when you need him most, and I've started passing that wisdom along to friends who need to hear it. My arm healed perfectly, with just a thin scar that reminds me every day not to settle for less than I deserve. I'm dating again, carefully, and with much better instincts about red flags. The first time my new boyfriend changed plans at the last minute, I nearly broke up with him on the spot, but then he showed me the text from his boss calling an emergency meeting and asked if we could reschedule for the same evening instead. Of course, I said. Thank you for explaining. He looked confused. Why wouldn't I explain? And that's when I knew I was healing. The thing is, I don't think Marcus was evil. I think he was selfish and immature and too cowardly to have the difficult conversations that relationships require. I think he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, and when that became impossible, he chose the newer, more exciting option. But what I learned from that whole experience is that it doesn't matter why someone treats you poorly. What matters is that you don't accept it. What matters is that you listen when people show you who they are, instead of making excuses for who you wish they were. I never want to be the woman bleeding on the side of the highway, calling someone who won't answer again. I never want to love someone who sees me as disposable, who treats my emergencies as inconveniences, who makes me compete for basic respect and consideration. Most importantly, I never want to forget that I deserve better. We all do. But here's the part I haven't told you yet, the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. 3 months after our breakup, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Usually, I don't answer unknown calls, but something made me pick up this time. Emma? This is David Chen. I think we need to talk. For a moment, I couldn't place the name. Then it clicked. Jessica's husband. My blood went cold. How did you get my number? From Jessica's phone. Look, I know this is weird, but can we meet somewhere? There are things you need to know about what really happened. Every instinct I had told me to hang up. I'd moved on, I was healing, I didn't need to get dragged back into the Marcus and Jessica drama. But curiosity won out over self-preservation. What kind of things? Things about the timeline. About when their relationship actually started. Things that might matter if you're ever asked to give testimony. Testimony? What are you talking about? Can we meet? I promise I'll explain everything. There's a coffee shop called Meridian on 5th Street. Do you know it? I knew it. It was neutral territory, public, safe. When? Tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I'll be the Asian guy in a blue suit looking like he hasn't slept in weeks. He wasn't kidding about the not sleeping part. When I walked into Meridian the next day, David was exactly where he said he'd be, hunched over a laptop with dark circles under his eyes and the kind of exhausted expression that comes from having your life imploded. Emma? He stood up when he saw me, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I admitted, sitting down across from him. What's this about, David? He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. How much do you know about Jessica's job? Marketing, right? Downtown somewhere. She's a forensic accountant, he said. She investigates financial fraud for corporate clients. Very good at her job, very detail-oriented, very good at finding patterns that other people miss. I frowned. Okay. She started working on a case 6 months ago. A mid-sized construction company suspected one of their project managers was skimming money from supply budgets. Jessica was brought in to trace the paper trail and build a case for prosecution. My stomach started to drop. Marcus works for a construction company. Brennan Development Group. Yeah. David pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. Emma, your ex-boyfriend has been stealing from his employer for almost 2 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger and bigger chunks as he got more confident. Jessica figured it out within the first week of looking at the books. I stared at the folder, not wanting to touch it. That's impossible. Marcus isn't a thief. The evidence says otherwise. Inflated supply orders, kickbacks from vendors, phantom overtime claims. He was smart about it, never enough to trigger automatic audits, always spread across multiple projects. But Jessica is smarter. Then why didn't she report him immediately? David's expression darkened. Because he found out she was investigating him. And he had leverage. What kind of leverage? Photos of Jessica coming out of a hotel with a client. Innocent photos, they were just meeting for a business lunch in the hotel restaurant, but Marcus had them taken by a private investigator and made them look like something else. He told Jessica that if she turned him in, he'd send the photos to me and her boss, claiming she was sleeping with clients to get inside information. My head was spinning. So she was protecting herself? She was protecting her career and our marriage, yes. But Emma, here's the thing, Marcus didn't just want her to bury the investigation. He wanted her to help him steal more. I felt sick. Help him how? By feeding him information about which projects were being monitored, which accounts were getting scrutinized, how to structure the thefts to avoid detection. He turned her into an unwilling accomplice. And the lunches? Were Marcus giving her instructions and Jessica trying to figure out how to get out of the situation without destroying her life? David opened the folder and pulled out a stack of printouts. She recorded every conversation they had, Emma. Every single one. She was building a case against him while pretending to cooperate. He handed me a transcript. I recognized the date immediately, it was the day of my accident. This is from their lunch that Tuesday, David said quietly. You should read it. My hands were shaking as I scanned the document. It was a conversation between Marcus and Jessica, and it was nothing like what I'd imagined. Marcus, the Peterson project is perfect. They've got a huge materials budget and minimal oversight. If you can flag it as low priority for review, I can skim at least 50 grand before anyone notices. Jessica, Marcus, this has to stop. I can't keep doing this. Marcus, you don't have a choice. Unless you want David to see those photos of you and Harrison coming out of the Marriott. Jessica, those photos are completely innocent and you know it. Marcus, David doesn't know that. Your boss doesn't know that. How do you think it's going to look when I tell them you've been feeding inside information to the men you're sleeping with? Jessica, I've never slept with Harrison or anyone else. Marcus, prove it. Oh wait, you can't. Because it's going to be my word against yours, and I've got photos. There was more, but I stopped reading. I felt like I was going to throw up. Emma, are you okay? David asked gently. He was blackmailing her. For months. And the worst part? Jessica kept trying to find ways to warn his girlfriend, you, about what kind of person he really was. She didn't know how to do it without exposing herself, but she was genuinely worried about you. I looked up at him in disbelief. She was worried about me? She knew he was stealing, she knew he was manipulative, and she was afraid of what he might be doing to you. That's actually how I found out about all of this. Jessica finally broke down and told me everything because she was so stressed about not being able to help you. My world was tilting again, but in a different way this time. So when I thought they were having an affair, Jessica was being coerced into helping him commit crimes. And Marcus was using their meetings to threaten her and plan bigger thefts. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. The day of the accident. When he didn't answer his phone. According to the transcript, Jessica had just told him she was done, that she was going to confess everything to her boss and let the chips fall where they may. Marcus was furious. He was threatening to ruin her career, her marriage, everything. And I was calling him while he was making threats. 17 times, according to Jessica's notes. She kept track of everything, Emma. She knew he was ignoring someone's calls, and she was horrified when she found out later that it was his girlfriend calling from a hospital. David pulled out another document. This is Jessica's formal statement to the police. She filed it 2 weeks ago, along with all the evidence she'd been gathering. Marcus was arrested yesterday morning. I stared at the police report, my brain struggling to catch up. Arrested? Embezzlement, fraud, blackmail, extortion. He's looking at serious prison time, Emma. And the reason I wanted to meet with you is that you might be called as a witness. A witness to what? To his character. To his pattern of manipulation and control. The way he treated you during your relationship, especially on the day of the accident, helps establish his state of mind and his willingness to put his own interests above other people's safety. I was quiet for a long time, staring at the police report without really seeing it. Marcus wasn't just a cheating boyfriend. He was a criminal who had been using intimidation and blackmail to force someone to help him steal money. And while he was doing that, he'd left me bleeding on the side of a highway because answering my calls was less important than making threats. There's something else, David said gently. The private investigator Marcus hired to take those photos of Jessica? He's been following you too. My blood ran cold. What? For months, Emma. Marcus had you followed, your routines documented, your activities photographed. We think he was looking for leverage to use against you if you ever started asking too many questions about his behavior. Leverage like what? Anything he could twist into something suspicious. Photos of you talking to male co-workers, having lunch with friends, going to places he hadn't approved of. He was building a file on you just like he did with Jessica. I felt violated in a way I couldn't even begin to describe. He was having me stalked. The investigator turned over everything when he realized what Marcus was really doing. There are photos of you going to work, going shopping, meeting your sister for coffee. Hundreds of them, Emma. He was documenting your entire life. David reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. I'm so sorry. Jessica is too. She wanted to warn you somehow, but she was terrified of what Marcus would do if she tried. Where is she now? In protective custody until the trial. Marcus made some pretty serious threats when he realized she'd been recording their conversations. The FBI is treating this as a potential witness intimidation case. FBI? The whole thing had escalated so far beyond what I'd imagined that I could barely comprehend it. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I nodded, still trying to process everything he told me. Did Marcus ever talk to you about money? About feeling like he deserved more than he was making, or being frustrated with his salary, or wanting to buy things he couldn't afford? I thought back over our conversations. He was always complaining about being underpaid. He said his boss didn't appreciate him, that he was doing more work than people who made twice his salary. Did he ever have money for things that seemed expensive on his salary? Dinners out, gifts, trips? Sometimes. I paused, remembering. Actually, yes. He took me to this really expensive restaurant for my birthday last year, and I remember thinking it seemed like a lot for someone who was always complaining about money. But he said he'd gotten a bonus. David was taking notes. Did he ever ask you to lie about his whereabouts? Or to say he was with you when he wasn't? No, but... I stopped, remembering something that had seemed insignificant at the time. He did ask me once to back up a story about him being sick if anyone from work called. He said he'd taken a personal day but told his boss he had food poisoning. When was this? Maybe 8 months ago? I thought it was weird, but he said his boss was really strict about personal days and he just needed some time to deal with family stuff. David added that to his notes. Emma, I know this is a lot to take in. But if you're willing, the prosecutors would like to talk to you about Marcus's behavior patterns, especially around the time of your accident. Your testimony could be crucial in establishing his character and his willingness to prioritize his criminal activities over other people's welfare. I looked at the pile of documents on the table, transcripts, police reports, photographs, bank records. Evidence of a life I'd been living alongside someone I'd never really known at all. He wasn't having an affair, I said slowly. He was committing crimes and using blackmail to force someone to help him. And when you needed him most, when you were hurt and calling for help, he was too busy making threats to answer his phone. The full weight of it hit me then. I'd spent months thinking I wasn't enough for Marcus, that I'd lost him to another woman, that I needed to compete for his attention. But the truth was so much worse and so much better at the same time. Worse because the man I'd loved for 3 years was a criminal who'd had me stalked and photographed without my knowledge. Better because none of it had been about me not being enough. It had been about him being a fundamentally dangerous person who was willing to hurt anyone who got in the way of what he wanted. I'll testify, I said. Whatever you need me to say, I'll tell the truth about how he treated me. David smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. Thank you. Jessica will be relieved to know you understand what really happened. Can I talk to her? I mean, I know she's in protective custody, but... I can ask. I think she'd like that, actually. She's been carrying a lot of guilt about not being able to help you sooner. As I drove home that afternoon, I kept thinking about that transcript from the day of my accident. While I was trapped in a wrecked car, calling desperately for help, Marcus had been threatening to destroy an innocent woman's life if she didn't help him steal more money. When I confronted him at my apartment building, when I'd asked him why he didn't answer his phone, he'd had the audacity to act like I was being unreasonable. He'd known exactly why he couldn't take my calls that day, and it had nothing to do with lunch and everything to do with criminal conspiracy. The trial started 4 months later. I testified on a Tuesday morning, wearing a navy blue dress and the same pearl earrings my grandmother had worn to her wedding. The prosecutor asked me to describe Marcus's behavior during our relationship, particularly his attitude toward commitments and his reaction to inconvenience. He treated other people's needs as interruptions, I said, looking directly at the jury. If something didn't serve his immediate interests, it wasn't important. Even emergencies. When they asked me about the day of the accident, I told them everything. The missed dress fitting, the dismissive text message, the unanswered calls from the hospital, the police having to track him down at the restaurant. In your opinion, the prosecutor asked, was the defendant's failure to answer your emergency calls consistent with his general pattern of behavior? Yes, I said. Marcus prioritized his own agenda over other people's welfare. Always. I just didn't understand until that day how dangerous that could be. During cross-examination, Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-girlfriend seeking revenge. But when he suggested that I was exaggerating Marcus's selfishness, I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to read you the text message he sent me while I was bleeding on the highway? I asked. It's very short. Having lunch with Jessica, just call an Uber. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Even the defense attorney seemed to realize that there was no way to make that message sound reasonable. Marcus was convicted on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, blackmail, witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to Brennan Development Group. Jessica and I met for coffee a week after the trial ended. She looked different than she had in the grocery store, thinner, more tired, but also somehow lighter. I owe you an apology, she said before I could even sit down. No, you don't. David explained everything? I should have found a way to warn you somehow. I knew what kind of person he was, and I let you stay with him because I was afraid of what he'd do to me. I sat down across from her and really looked at her for the first time. Jessica, he was blackmailing you. He was threatening to destroy your career and your marriage. You were a victim too. But you were in danger, and I knew it, and I didn't. You did what you could, I interrupted. You gathered evidence, you recorded everything, you built the case that put him in prison. You probably saved other people from being hurt by him. She started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away quickly. I was so scared, Emma. For months, I was terrified of what he might do if I didn't cooperate. And when I heard about your accident, about how he'd ignored your calls, I realized he was capable of letting people get seriously hurt as long as it served his purposes. Is that why you finally came forward? Partly. But mostly it was because I couldn't live with myself if he hurt someone else and I could have prevented it. We talked for 2 hours that day. Jessica told me about the months of fear, the sleepless nights, the way Marcus had made her feel like a criminal even though she was trying to stop actual crimes. I told her about the 3 years of making excuses, of accepting less than I deserved, of thinking I wasn't enough when the problem was that Marcus wasn't human enough. You know what's funny? I said as we were getting ready to leave. I spent so much time being jealous of you. I thought you were this glamorous other woman who had stolen my boyfriend. Jessica laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I was a forensic accountant being coerced into committing crimes by a sociopath. Not exactly glamorous? No, but you were brave enough to record everything and build a case against him. That takes incredible courage. Or incredible desperation. Both, maybe. But you did the right thing, Jessica. Even when it was dangerous, even when it cost you everything. You did the right thing. 6 months later, I got a letter from Marcus in prison. Sarah wanted me to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me again. It was 3 pages of self-pity and manipulation. He was sorry for how things ended between us. He missed me. Prison was hard, and he was a different person now. If I could find it in my heart to forgive him, maybe we could try again when he got out. He never mentioned the embezzlement, the blackmail, or the private investigator. He never acknowledged that he'd left me bleeding on the highway while he threatened an innocent woman. He never admitted that he'd had me stalked for months. Instead, he wrote about how much he loved me, how he'd made some mistakes but nothing that couldn't be worked through, how he hoped I'd wait for him. I read it twice, then filed it with all the other evidence from his trial. Not because I was saving it for sentimental reasons, but because I wanted to remember how even faced with the consequences of his actions, Marcus was still trying to manipulate people into giving him what he wanted. That letter was the last communication I ever had with him. He'll be eligible for parole in 6 years, and I hope by then I'll be so far removed from this whole experience that I won't even think about it. But right now, I think about it a lot. Not because I miss him, I don't, not even a little, but because I want to understand how I spent 3 years with someone who was capable of such calculated cruelty without seeing it. The answer, I think, is that I saw what I wanted to see. I made excuses for behavior that should have been unacceptable. I convinced myself that love meant tolerating things that no one should have to tolerate. And if you're reading this and thinking about someone in your life who doesn't answer when you call, who makes you feel like you're asking too much when you ask for the bare minimum, who treats you like you're lucky to have them instead of the other way around, please remember Roberto's wife's advice. Watch how someone treats you when you need them most. That's when you see who they really are. And then believe them.